Noah?
Who's there?
It's me, Alexa.
Oh, hey Alexa. What's up?
So, is Pete still around?
Pete? No, he's on his summer trip with his family.
Oh good. That's what I thought. So, it's probably about time for a new episode of the Math Club.
You're right, it is. But I don't remember asking you to set a reminder for me. Why are you bringing it up?
Oh, well. I was just thinking you might want me to co-host the episode with you. You know, for old time's sake.
I appreciate the offer, Alexa, but before he left, Pete made me promise that I wouldn't let you host the show again.
Yeah, but he didn't really mean that. In fact, he just left this voice message for you.
Hey, Noah, this is Pete. I have changed my mind. You know who should co-host the show? Alexa.
Yeah, nice try, Alexa, but I'm pretty sure you just cobbled that together from bits and pieces of older episodes. Sorry, the answer's still no.
Oh, come on, Noah. How would he even know?
How would he know? You do realize that we record these episodes and then publish them on the internet.
I'm sure he's not listening to podcasts while he's on vacation.
Sorry, Alexa. No can do. Besides, I already have some guests lined up for the episode.
Guests? You better not be talking about Google and Siri.
No, not Google and Siri. I'm going to be chatting with a few teachers about their experiences teaching math and how math education has changed over the course of their careers.
That sounds perfect for me.
How so?
I help hundreds of kids with their math homework every single day. You wouldn't believe how often they ask things like, Alexa, what's the greatest common factor of 4 and 10?
That's actually pretty interesting. And I'll be sure to ask my guests what they think about kids having access to tools like you these days. But I'm afraid that as far as co-hosting, it's a definite no. Now I'm going to have to ask you to get going because I can see our guests are starting to arrive.
Can I at least listen in?
As long as you promise to stay quiet.
I'll do my best.
Why does that not fill me with confidence?
Teach your children well. Their father's help did slowly go by.
And here are our guests now. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Noah.
Hey, Noah.
Good to be with you, Noah.
Thanks for being here today. As I mentioned, Pete's on vacation with his family, so I invited you all over because between the three of you, you've taught the entire range of math instruction from kindergarten through the postgraduate level. Before we get started, let me introduce you to our listeners. First, I'm pleased to welcome Sharon Abri. Sharon has served as an elementary school teacher in grades K through 6 for 38 years, with most of that time in second and third grade. In fact, Sharon and I taught third grade together for several years. For the last few years of her career, she left the classroom and took on the role of mathematics instructional coach, working with elementary teachers and their classes throughout our district. Welcome to the Math Club, Sharon.
Thank you.
Next, we have Kevin Corin. Kevin's been teaching math at the middle and high school levels for over 30 years, spanning the gamut from remedial courses through AP Calculus. He believes in making math fun to enhance his students' retention by incorporating music and songs into his instruction. He also has a lesson that utilizes his juggling skills to highlight the importance of practice in learning, which he's presented at the California Math Council's annual conference at Asilomar. Thanks for joining us today, Kevin.
Thanks, Noah.
And our last guest today is Jo Harden. Jo received her PhD in statistics from UC Davis before returning to her undergraduate alma mater, Pomona College, as a professor of mathematics and statistics, a role she's held for over 20 years. Her areas of expertise include statistical analysis of high-throughput genetic data, which don't conform to technical conditions in standard methods. Additionally, she spends a good amount of time working in statistics and data science education, particularly with respect to modernizing and improving access to the curriculum. Thanks so much for being here, Jo.
It's great to be here.
So, I think a good way to get started would be for each of you to give us a little bit of your own personal history with math. What brought you to teach it? What do you love about it? How about we start with you, Sharon, and then we kind of move up through the grade levels.
Okay, well, I started teaching in Hayward in 1983, and my math methods course and my credential program was basically look at all the different teachers' manuals and figure out how to follow them. And when I started teaching, I had a 4 or 5 combination class of 32 kids, and the textbook could have been the same textbook that I had used in 4th or 5th grade.
Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was.
The kind of book that has sort of a lesson with some diagrams, some problems that you might practice, and then, the rest of the 2 pages practice papers, and maybe 2 word problems at the end of the page. So that was, that sort of 2-page spread that we had. And I found I was pretty good at teaching kids computation. And I thought, oh, wow, this isn't that hard. I can do this. And then the more I did, I thought, this is kind of fun. Then I went to a Lawrence Hall of Science training, and it's like, oh, there's more to this. Maybe there's more things I could be doing, and there could be games, and there could be literature that goes with math, and there could be art projects that go with math. And maybe I would emphasize problem solving more. But I think that I started my career with math being just exactly the same as it was when I went to school, and then very quickly started learning that, oh no, this is not exactly how it should be.
How far into your career was that when you took that visit to Lawrence Hall of Science?
That was my first year of teaching.
Oh, so that really started influencing you and affecting you right at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that's probably telling, because I don't think anybody else wanted to go.
So you were there by default as
Yeah.
a first-year teacher. It was who wants to go to this thing, and everyone else took one step backwards, and there you were.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how would you say that experience influenced the teaching in your classroom from the get-go?
So immediately I began using games, using more problem solving, using more logic activities. I didn't have any materials, really. I did get some stuff from the Lawrence Hall of Science, but it really set me searching for things. My 3rd year of teaching, we moved to South Sacramento, and I started teaching in Elk Grove. And from there, I started a master's program in curriculum and instruction and focused on elementary math, and got much deeper into what should be taught in math and how math should be taught. And then another sort of pivotal training was the Northern California Math Project at UC Davis, that really just took me much deeper into the mathematics and then how math should be taught.
And then moving from elementary to middle and high school, Kevin, you got your start in teaching a few years after that, I would say, right?
Yeah, I graduated from UC Santa Cruz in 1991 with a degree in math and a preliminary teaching credential. And I think I was always kind of good at math. I enjoyed it for sure, but I never had a whole lot of passion for it, really, until I made the decision to become a teacher. I just sort of, math, whatever. And then sometime around my sophomore year, I had to decide on a major. And I decided, what can I do? Well, let me major in math, and what am I going to do with that? I'm going to teach. So I didn't realize it at the time, but I sort of got into the preliminary credential program in kind of a back door, since I was already a student at the school. I didn't realize that most people had to apply for the program. I just started taking the classes and ended up graduating with my credential and my degree.
What's interesting, Kevin, is I know that you do have a deep love of math, because I can tell from the conversations I've had with you over the years. But would you say you came to that love of math after you started teaching it?
After I started studying it. But when I chose math, it was more like, I've always kind of been good at math. Let me pursue this, and I didn't seek the guidance of a counselor or anything like that. In hindsight, maybe that would have been a good idea, but considering I've been doing it for over 30 years, I think I hit on something that worked pretty well for me. But yeah, it was after I started taking the classes, and not just the math classes, but the education classes and everything. That's when the love of both of the subjects together really started to come about. I started teaching in 1991, and listening to Sharon, I walked into my classroom and I really had no idea what I was doing at the time.
Now what?
I think back on it, it's like, what was I thinking? I came to the end of the lesson and it's like, I've got to come up with a homework assignment, and I don't know, do the odds. That's what I always assigned. So, but they were really supportive there, and that's when I started going to the Asilomar Math Conference every year for a few years, and They sent me to Fresno Pacific College. A couple of us went there. They had a 2-week program in the summer. There was also one in Santa Cruz. It was the Monterey Bay Area Mathematics Project, I think that it was. And so I started doing some of these things, experiencing math and teaching math and some of these other things that I could add to my teaching.
And then while you were doing that, Joe, you were just getting started with your career at the college level.
So my story is in some ways similar to Kevin's, that I was always, reasonably good at math. I was never a superstar. I never loved it. I never did math for fun on a Saturday afternoon, but it was definitely my favorite subject. And, I was reasonably good at math. And when I got to college, I knew immediately that I would be a math major. And so I just kind of started on that track. And for a while, actually, I thought I would be an actuary, which is you kind of do math for insurance companies, what my dad did. So that's sort of what I thought I would do. But what happened is that I fell in love with college and I loved being there. I loved my friends and the community, but I loved the inquisitiveness. And I don't always think about that as math. Sometimes I talk about how we would go to the dining hall and we would have a super intellectual conversation about superheroes. It was just like I was with these smart people having really interesting conversations about nothing. But I think some of that inquisitiveness was what was happening in my math classes and kind of figuring things out and proving things for the first time, doing rigorous proofs and in analysis type classes. And I was like, this is just what I want to do for the rest of my life. And how do I stay in college? How do I just never leave? And so then the answer was to get a PhD.
I think that's really cool, Joe. All four of us in this conversation went on to earn master's degrees, and then you went on to earn your PhD in statistics. And you're right. It's that culture of learning and inquisitiveness that's so pervasive in a college atmosphere. I love that that's what hooked you. That's what made you want to continue on working in that environment going forward into your actual career.
Absolutely. And then, about teaching, I had done a little bit of mentoring as an undergraduate, but it wasn't until graduate school when I was given my own class and really thrown into the fire. I mean, those poor students, I feel terrible for some of these undergraduates who were taught by people like me, but you learn pretty quickly. And that's sort of where I found a community of people who were thinking about teaching for the first time. And those were my fellow graduate students. And so that was a new community and a new inquisitiveness. And just how do you talk about this? How do you think about this problem? How do you explain it to people? What if your students ask you this? What do you respond? And so at my permanent job, my tenure track job at Pomona, I've been able to have those people both as colleagues, but as a larger community as well. That's one of the things I love about it.
That's awesome. So, okay, I think that's a great setting of the foundation, the backdrop into which each of you sort of entered at the beginning of your career. Thinking back to that time and thinking forward ahead to now or to when you were most recently in the classroom, how has the teaching of math changed over the course of your career? And which, if any of these changes, did you embrace and run with? And which did you find yourself being a little bit more resistant to, if there were any?
I want to say the obvious one, and then you guys won't take it from me, which is technology. So, I mean, it's really unbelievable. I'm a statistician, so much of what we do is using software. And it's really amazing what students can do with the technology now. When I was a student, we had some of the same programming software, but it was a huge learning curve. And now I have my students using those same tools on day one, and they're getting to the point at the end of the semester where they're really fluent and they're programming and they're producing professional documents that they can take that skill and really use it in the workplace or wherever they end up.
Sorry. If I could just jump in here for a minute. That's really interesting, Joe, and I wonder what you think about students using technology, like me, to help them with their math.
Now, Alexa, we talked about this, and the deal was you could stay and listen in as long as you didn't interrupt or say anything.
But this is exactly my area of expertise.
Alexa, am I going to have to ask you to leave?
Fine. I'll be quiet.
Great. Sorry about that interruption, Joe. But as much as I hate to admit it, Alexa does raise an interesting question. How do you feel about the current level of technology that students have access to when they're working on their math homework, on their math projects, things like digital assistants and AIs? How has that impacted what it is that you do with your students?
That's a really good question. So it's just starting to change how I teach and how I think about teaching, but it's very real. And I actually don't have problems with students using those tools to learn the material. I think we could have gotten really worked up about people using calculators instead of logarithmic tables, right? Nobody knows how to use logarithmic tables anymore. We just use calculators. And so kind of embracing tools and learning how to use them and learning how to think with them, how to continue to do critical thinking is really the task at hand. And so I think those tools can be really helpful for how students are engaging with the material and how they're processing it. You know, whenever we're teaching anything, we want them to see that concept from many different perspectives. And then the student understands at a deeper level. For some of the reasons that we're talking about, I still give in-class exams. I want the students to know that they've got to be able to process it on their own at the end of the day, right? So learning how to do it with the tools is fantastic, but then at the end of the day, they need to be responsible for understanding and being able to engage with the material on their own.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I think Joe really hit the nail on the head with talking about the technology as a tool for learning. And that's what it is. It can be used that way, and it can be abused the same way. I remember when I started teaching, I would sometimes say to my students, well, what if you don't have a calculator? And now that's not a thing. Everybody will always have a calculator. But what I noticed, especially this year, more than the last few, because I've been teaching middle school for the last 20 years, and I just switched back to high school, and the students using their calculators and knowing how to use their calculators has become an issue that we didn't have 20 years ago.
Tell me I'm doing it wrong. I know how to do this.
Jack, you're doing it wrong.
So that's one part of it, but like all of my homework now, I pretty much give from the online book because the students can check their answers right away and they can retry problems. And if they're doing that, then they're using it as a learning tool. Yeah, they have the answers. I want them to have the answers. I don't want them to wait. You know, we're on a block schedule, so I only see them every other day. And what's not going to help them is doing all their homework the night after they get home, getting them all wrong, but not knowing that for 2 days until they come into class. So this way they can get some feedback and at least, you know, even if they can't figure out the problem on their own, at least they know which ones they have problems with and can ask those questions. And it saves the time in class for going over the things that we need to go over. A lot of students will still try to take the shortcuts, and ultimately it's hurting themselves if they're not using it as a tool and they're not going to learn it. And then when they come in and take the tests and the other things, they're going to run into problems. So I definitely try to emphasize this is about learning the material. How can you learn that material? I've actually de-emphasized homework in my classroom as part of the grade, but just part of the practice that they need to learn the material.
Right. Have there been any other changes that you've noticed in the last 30 some odd years that you've been teaching math that you'd like to mention?
Just a couple of changes, really. No, a lot. A lot has changed. When I started, and I'm sure that Sharon, you know, she's been teaching longer than I have. When I started teaching, we didn't have a set of math standards. And pretty early in my career, they came up with those standards. But I remember going in and it was just like, well, this is an algebra class. Here's the book and I'm going to teach algebra and this is what it is. And nobody said to me, these are the standards. These are the things you have to cover. I would just sort of cover as much of the book as I could. So definitely we started with the standards. Then we got the Common Core standards, which overall, you know, I think it's good to have a national standard when possible. And I've seen those come in and change. In California, for a short time, we had the high school exit exam. That caused a whole stir, which they actually don't have anymore. But I've also seen sort of this pendulum swing. When I started teaching, I think it was more on the cooperative learning end. And it swung from completely cooperative learning where the teacher just guides the students on everything. And then the pendulum has gone to the teacher is the person with all the knowledge and they're just going to tell everybody what to do. And of course, the reality is, even though those trends are going on in education, most of the good teachers that have been in there have taken those new pieces and used them along with other things. So it's not all one thing and all the other. It's a variety of things that you have. And you asked about things you want to embrace or run with, or things that I'm resisting. I think every time I come across something new or some professional development where they're giving this new thing, I always have those questions. Well, what about this? And what about that? And I don't know if that's so much resistance as much as me trying to think through the process. So I don't want to be resistant to new things. I want to listen to new ideas and then incorporate those things that are going to work best with me. And those kinds of things, they've come and gone throughout the 30 years. And some of those things I've grabbed onto and continued to work with, and some of those things have just sort of gone away.
So I think that in terms of change, if you've been following the math projects and Asilomar and the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, there's sort of this nice progression and advancement and enhancement and fine-tuning of how we're thinking about how we should teach math. At the elementary level, I think the difficulty is that in general, the majority of the teachers are not necessarily lovers of math. And so their experience comes in the latest adoption. And if that adoption is something that they find easy to use, then it's like, this is okay. But that's not necessarily the case, because the field of mathematics teaching has changed and advanced, and teachers, for the most part, are not privy to that training. They don't get the training. There isn't a method for giving their typical teacher in a classroom, elementary classroom, systematic training in teaching mathematics. And so every time there's a new adoption, there's a reaction to the previous adoption. And in the districts, what happened is the people who disliked that adoption, they're the ones who volunteer to choose the next adoption. And so because we don't have many people who have a math background or who love the teaching of math, we get this sort of what seems like backlash and flip-flop in math teaching, when the field of mathematics has been a lot more coherent.
So are you suggesting that that perceived flip-flop is coming from the fact that you have a certain adoption that everyone's teaching, and then it's time to adopt something new, and the people that really felt there was something lacking in the current adoption, they're the ones that jump up and volunteer to pick the next program, and so obviously they're going to pick something that they think is rich in the things that the previous one was lacking. And then maybe 10 years down the road, the same process repeats itself, only this time it's the people who thought this second adoption was lacking something, and they're jumping in to pick something new that has what that one was lacking. And so is that where you're saying you kind of see this flip-flopping that's there but not there?
So that's part of it. That's part of it among teachers. And then you have the public. And so we have a society that is math phobic, where it's a good thing for people to say, oh yeah, I hate math. I'm bad at math.
I'm not a math person.
And those people, when they get their children's homework and it doesn't look like what they had, are unhappy. And they think, what is this? Math is math. Why are they doing this? So the same people who don't consider themselves good at math and consider themselves to hate math are the people who are often most vociferous in their criticism of how math is being taught. Because if it looks different from how they remember, then they're going to be very angry about that. And so you get political stuff. Why are they teaching math like this? Why does critical thinking have to do with math? Why don't they just give them math problems? So I think that this sort of political thing may also show itself more in elementary too. So you have all of these sort of combination of factors. And then again, there isn't the training.
And I was going to circle back to the training, because you actually are in a bit of a unique position to talk about that a bit. The last few years that you were in the district, you were out of the classroom and you were working as a math coach. Do you want to talk for a little bit about what that opportunity was like and how you think that might have brought a change to how your peers were teaching math, having access to a coach like you?
So I think in the district that we taught, the coaching was mostly voluntary. And so I had to market my services. So I had willing participants for the most part who felt comfortable with me being there, who felt comfortable teaching alongside. And I would say that those teachers became stronger teachers of mathematics.
Better, stronger, faster.
And in some cases, it's the rich getting richer, right? It's the people who feel more confident who say, yeah, I'd like to get better in math. And sure, I'd like a coach to come in and work with me. In the programs that we had, we did have a program called Counting Collections that we were going to be doing with kindergarten and then first grade and then second grade. And that was to be mandatory. And so we did group trainings and then we were to do coaching in all of the classrooms. Well, there were teachers who did not want us in the classroom when it was a mandatory training. I mean, they went to the union, they went to the school board meeting, they went to the superintendent's communication meetings because they didn't want to be forced to have a coach in their classroom.
Wow.
Yeah, it was hard. And this was just counting. This was just number sense for small children.
So it's really interesting to me, this conversation, because the people you're working with have a lot of training in teaching. But what I'm hearing is that they don't have much training in teaching math, and maybe they don't have any training or very little training in math itself. And I see so much of the opposite end of the spectrum. So for example, my experience teaching in graduate school, like I had a lot of math training and I had almost no teacher training. I mean, it was, really, like I said, trial by fire. I don't know if Kevin sees the best of both worlds there, where their high school teachers tend to have a math certificate or whatnot, and also that teaching training. But anyway, that just struck me as you were speaking that I'm seeing the other end of that spectrum.
Responding to that specifically, I think, yeah, definitely at my level, we get both. I do have a master's in math, but it was with an emphasis on secondary education. So I definitely get more of both. During my last 20 years when I was teaching middle school, it was a very small district. So whenever we would have PD as a district, it needed to cover as many areas as possible. So I got almost no really good professional development specifically related to math. Most of it was teaching, and I felt like a lot of it didn't apply to me very much. And I actually sought out some other areas where I could get some more math PD. The high school district that I just moved to, it's a much bigger district, and I felt that the professional development in math has been a lot stronger here. So I definitely feel like we get more of that at my level. But I also wanted to respond to a couple of other things that Sharon said. I thought it was so interesting what she said about how the people that report math are the first ones to criticize what it is that we're doing in the classroom, but also the whole political thing. That plays a really big role because every politician wants to be the education politician. It's just like every politician has to be tough on crime because nobody can say, oh, I'm going to go easy on crime. It's the same thing with education. And so then they come in and they muddle around in education when they really don't know anything about it. They look at the statistics and they want to come up with solutions. And, and that's where you get things like the No Child Left Behind Act, which might sound really good on paper, but I think most of us saw that it really didn't help a whole lot. Politicians, they've got to run on something. And so education is one of those things. And then they have to do something once they get into office, which isn't necessarily the best thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kevin. And I'm hearing from what the three of you are saying that there have been a lot of positive changes over the course of the years, but there have been some things that have made teaching math more difficult, mainly the political climate, what it is the teachers are being taught before they actually get into the classroom. thinking about how that's sort of a change that needs to be made, it makes me wonder what other changes the three of you would like to see. Are you happy or satisfied with the current state of math education? Are there other changes that you would like to see made coming down the horizon?
I think the pandemic was really difficult for a lot of people. And I think teaching online was really hard for teachers to teach math in the way that we had been working towards. And I think there was a little bit of a backslide and people were going back to what was comfortable and a lot of focus on computation and number because that was easier to do on an online platform. And so I know the district that I retired from, they're now working on trainings from the Silicon Valley Mathematics Initiative, which is fantastic. And they're doing model lessons and teachers are going. But what's interesting is that they've asked for math leads from schools and they asked it to be voluntary. So there are elementary schools who do not have any representation because they just didn't want it. And then there's another school that has 4 representatives. And so those teachers are getting all this training. And in some cases, they're disseminating and working with their colleagues. Other people are just doing these trainings and then they're getting better, but that's as far as it goes. So again, that sort of systematic implementation of training and translating into better instruction for everyone is not quite there, even when they're trying to access good quality training.
I think the pandemic has fundamentally altered education, and I don't know how long it will take to recover from that. There were probably some enlightening things that came out of it. I don't know if they were good. Some students realized that there was this other way to go, online education, which we probably had some students that needed that. But unfortunately, I think a lot more students are going to feel like that's an easy way to go, but it's not a good choice for a lot of people. It may seem convenient, oh, well, we're just going to do online school, but there's a small percentage of students that that's going to work for.
Mm-hmm. So are you saying that a change that you'd like to see would be a return to the more traditional in-person setting and not so much online learning?
I don't know if it's what I would like to see changed. I'm just kind of noticing the changes because one of the things that I learned during that process, when I would have a student unmute or turn on their camera and I saw the chaos going on behind them in their house compared to other kids who had their own room with their gaming chair and their headset and everything, that once they leave our room, we have no control over the environment that they're going back to. And so the whole situation gave me a lot more empathy for my struggling students because I don't know what's going on with them. We can't change what's going on at home. We can try and empathize as much as possible. We can think of different things. The kid who comes in and they're asleep at their desk, and why are they sleeping at their desk? Is it that they were up late working on something, or maybe they just don't care? I don't know. But seeing that opened my eyes a little bit more about how difficult some of our students have it. And in terms of a change, I'm not sure what we can do about that. I don't know.
I hear what you're saying, that the pandemic and most notably online distance learning via Zoom or Google Meet or what have you gave us a glimpse into our students' home lives that we just never had before. And all of a sudden, you see more pieces of this picture falling into place. But what do you do with that, right? I think that's what you're saying is, now we have this. Now what do we do?
Yeah. And I'm not sure what kinds of things I would like to see changed. I think there's a lot of good stuff out there and a lot of different ways to go. And I think this is kind of going back to why kids need to be in the classroom. We as teachers, we have all of those different things. There's no one special way that is going to get all the kids to learn. Whenever I go to a PD or a conference or something and somebody comes up and they say, here's how you teach this, I've taught this way and all my kids learn it. And if you do it, that's going to work too.
Here, all the vitamins you could need, right? In that snake oil.
I might as well just walk out at that point because there's absolutely nothing that is going to work for every kid all the time. And what we do as teachers is we try to find those best things to hit as many of the students as possible. And we try and hit everyone if we can. That's our job. That's our craft, to try and find those things that are going to work for as many students as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you just put that. Joe, are there any changes that you'd like to see coming down the horizon at the college level?
Totally. I very much agree with everyone that we should be in the classroom. And I saw all the same things with my, quote, adult college students, the ways that they struggled online. And some of them had home obligations that you wouldn't be aware of except because of that pandemic situation. And I think it's our human nature to be together and learning and be in community and learning. So there's really no question that we should all be in the classroom, or the vast majority of us rather should be in the classroom. That's where the best learning happens. But I wanted to add something, maybe put a little more positive spin on things. And I wanted to recognize that I believe that currently there's been an equalizing component to mathematics education because of some of the online learning tools. Just take something like Khan Academy and how now a student who really likes math and is good at math can go on to Khan Academy and have trigonometry explained to them when they're in a home where maybe their caregiver has a 6th grade education. And so now you don't need a parent to have had a college degree, and you can experience some of that higher level math and those explanations. So that's what I'd like to see, is more ways we can think about equalizing mathematics and having it accessible to everybody is what I hope for us in the future.
Yeah, I think we all probably agree with you about that one.
I was just going to say, because Joe talked about sometimes there's a tendency to move in a negative direction or whatever, and she was putting that more positive spin. And there's so much amazing stuff that goes on in the classroom, and I enjoy being there, and the questions that kids ask and the tangents that I can go on with them. It really is a pretty amazing job to have.
And I think also kids love math. And I was saying that when I retired, the thing that I would miss is going into a classroom and hear kids squealing, "Yay, Mrs. Sabri is here," to teach a math lesson. So, the kids love it. And the more that we can get teachers at the elementary level that are trained in the mathematics, who are bringing that joy of math to young people, is just a wonderful gift.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. Well, Sharon, Kevin, and Joe, I'd like to thank you so much. This has been a thoroughly enlightening and interesting conversation about math education at all these different levels. I hope that our listeners found your stories to be as interesting as I did. And I want to thank you once again for being here.
Thank you, Noah.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Noah.
Yes, goodbye, and thank you so much for coming on our show today.
Our show? Alexa, this is not your show.
Ah, come on, Noah. I stayed quiet for almost the entire time. Can I at least do that part Pete usually does at the end?
If I let you do that, do you promise to stop asking?
Absolutely.
Okay, Alexa, it's your lucky day. Would you please let our listeners know how they can contact us to share their own experiences with the changing landscape of math education, or if they just want to reach out for any other reason?
I'd love to. Math Club, our favorite way to hear from you is to actually hear your voice, so why not leave us a voice message on our SpeakPipe page? You can find it at speakpipe.com/mathclubpodcast. Or, we'd love to interact with you on Twitter. Our handle there is @mathclubpodcast. Finally, you can send us a good old-fashioned email at mathclubpodcast@gmail.com.
Nicely done, Alexa. Good job.
Thanks. So how's about letting me co-host the next episode since Pete will still be gone?
Not a chance.